Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's session, Navigating a Technological Future. It's wonderful to see you all today, and I hope you're well. My name is Gemma, and I am from the Expo North Digital team. Expo North Digital is Highlands and Islands Enterprises mechanism for specialist digital support for the creative and heritage economies across the Highland Council region, and the project is delivered by Ironworks Venue. This workshop is part of HIE's Northern Innovation Hub, designed to build on and accelerate business innovation. It is funded through the Inverness and Highland City Region deal, a joint initiative supported by £315 million of investment from the UK and Scottish governments, Highland Council, HIE and UHI. I am now going to pass over to Tim Wright, who is our incredible Expo North Digital specialist. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Gemma. It's very kind. Nothing like bigging up the introduction there. So welcome, everybody. Small and select group. Happy that we take questions as we go. As it's such a small group, we'll be able to manage that. So if you do have a question through any of this that you want to inquire about, or if you've got a point you'd like to elaborate upon, just unmute yourself and jump straight in, and we'll try and take it at that point. If you prefer, we can leave things to the end, and I'll try and make sure that we've got time at the end to chat over any of the things that we cover today. So I'm going to look to share my screen now. So bear with me just for a second and see if we can make that work. So can people see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. That's always a good start. So the purpose of this afternoon's session is to talk about ways of dealing with digital disruption and where the opportunities lie, but also reassuring ourselves that the future is perhaps not as desperately frightening as sometimes we seem to have it presented to us. So we've got an hour for this. As I say, I'll try and leave plenty of time at the end for questions that might arise from it. But the approach that I intend to take is to try and put some of the technological disruption into context, so understanding it perhaps from a historical perspective, that this is not an unusual or new thing that we're experiencing here. Consider what some of the core disruptors are at this point in time and likely to be for the medium term. In my view, it's my personal view, so you're free to disagree with me if you would pick up on other disruptors. But then importantly, to think about, having explored some of that historical context and how disruption typically happens, think about some of the approaches and techniques that we can explore as ways of navigating a more managed way in that sort of uncertain area, but also how we might be able to pick out the real advantages and the opportunities that exist for us in a growing technological future. And as I say, a lot of this is driven by the fact that I increasingly hear people somewhat panicked and alarmed by some of the rapidity of change that is happening at the moment and what the implications might be for them individually or for their businesses. And what I want to do is give people tools and mechanisms that gives them some assurance that they are not helpless in this space, that they can manage this quite well. And this whole idea of the alarmism that we're encountering at the moment is not entirely new. If you're as old as me, you can remember a number of these things happening over time, be it the alarmism that we had over the nanotechnology and the expectation that we were all going to end up with nothing but grey goo, which fortunately didn't happen, or as far as I'm aware anyway. So trying to put things into a little bit of context and to cast back to suggest that this type of disruption has been going on a long time, I'm going to take us a long way back to 1450 and the advent of some very, very disruptive technology. And that, of course, is the printing press and Gutenberg. And strangely enough, I was just in Bruges today, this weekend, I should say. So fully immersed in that kind of early medieval period. And the impacts that the printing press had were very, very profound historically. And what's interesting about it is some of the features that we can pick out that were present there that seem to be common factors with all technological disruption. So their leading practitioner obviously was Gutenberg. Well, one of the important elements that made printing viable was the emergence of casting technology at the same time. And one point that I will try to illustrate is that generally speaking, it's not usually one single technology that creates step change in the adoption of that technology into a commercial area. There are usually a range of different things that come together with one particular technology that actually utilizes numerous things that brings about the change. So the casting technology is an interesting one. You may or may not be aware of the fact that Gutenberg's father worked in the mint and had a significant familiarity with the casting of soft metals. And there are a number of other areas. There was a smaller alphabet in use. So China, of course, was already making use of movable print, but it didn't attain the same amount of penetration at that stage by virtue of the fact that they had a much larger alphabet to deal with. One of the other significant factors was the developments in paper. So paper was being mass produced for growth post Black Death. And a lot of that was through mechanization. Linen became cheaper, and so paper became cheaper. And the availability of these multiple factors, the development of the mold and decal method of producing paper, all of these things kind of came together to produce the opportunity that printing gave us. And if we think about the impact that it had on individuals, Caxton, of course, is an interesting case. Caxton was 40 years of age when he started moving into the printing sector. He was actually an extraordinarily successful and very rich linen and cloth merchant prior to that in the drapery field, in fact, in Bruges. But he moved his career, if you will, took advantage of the opportunity that printing showed us by setting up his press in 1480 in Westminster. So a number of elements coming together to make printing significant. And for one particular well-known name in that space, it was a opportunity for him to move away from his career at what at the time was a significantly advanced age. Now, typically, if we look at technical disruptions from that point onwards, and there have been many, there are a number of obviously common observable impacts that we have. These would include role displacement, so particular skills and experience can become no longer useful or viable, and role removal, decrease in demand for certain activities, and redundancies of platforms. These are all things that we will typically encounter with new technologies as they come into play. But there are also positive impacts because there is usually a kind of corollary to that, with new roles being generated in the creative sector. You know, these technologies create entirely new creative genres. So if you think about that from the printing point of view, the growth of writing and distribution of written materials created a whole range of new opportunities for the written word and how that played into political discourse as well as news distribution. It also changed the way we think about, for example, libraries. So libraries became completely different spaces with books being stored in different ways. So it had architectural impacts. So it can create completely new markets, require new skills, and new models and approaches. So there are a range of negative and positive aspects that typically emerge from any kind of technological disruption, printing being one of them, but we can trace it down through the years to identify those common impacts. So again, you know, lots and lots of examples here from history, from, you know, a significant period ago through to more recent developments, each of which have been either potentially very disruptive or actually very disruptive. But it's also worth bearing in mind that not every single thing that is deemed as the new technological disruption actually does translate into the change that is predicted for it. So one of the examples here is Cliché Vert, which was expected to be an incredibly disruptive new visual medium by bringing together the use of print and camera, but it didn't really persist. It didn't actually become the big change. And I also alluded to another, nanotechnology never quite, or has not quite to date, created quite the changes that we perhaps expected. But some have been very, very profound. And as you can see from the map and the sort of 8 o'clock point on the screen of the USA, that is the very first internet connection with the DARPANet. And we all know, obviously, the impact that that has grown from as the first very basic, resilient, robust IP network developed for defensive purposes, has now morphed into one of the most disruptive technologies that we have encountered, historically speaking. But there is no doubt that the effects of new technologies and the new ways of working that go with that can have quite significant impact. So if you're as old as me, you can probably remember typing pools. Certainly when I entered the workforce, typing pools were extremely common and a very, very, I remember it speaking to my careers advisor at school, and typing pools and things like that were very, very respectable and commonly exercised career paths for young people leaving school back then. But of course, it is now no longer something that you're likely to encounter. And obviously, not all of the predictions that we have are quite as disastrous as they sometimes painted. So again, I very much remember home taping is killing music, and it's illegal, of course. And amazingly enough, as far as I'm aware, the music industry is still here, despite the fact that we did, and I certainly did, an awful lot of home taping, and I wasn't alone in that. And the cassette has kind of disappeared somewhat. It has a niche presence now, but it was very much perceived as a significant threat to the business, but didn't actually manifest in exactly that particular way. And we can have different approaches to dealing with technological disruption from a historical perspective, whether it be the man with the red flag in front of the automobile in early days and the fears that steam trains were going to send people deaf and blind because they traveled so fast. Or we can take a kind of Luddite approach and smash the machine. So there are a range of different thought patterns that we can explore in terms of how we respond to technological change. We can take regulatory views to try and restrict its impacts. We can take very destructive approaches and push back against the arrival of technologies. We can panic about things that perhaps are not particularly worth panicking about, because not all of the predictions of disruption are necessarily correct. Or we can take a more managed approach and learn from those historical lessons of typically what happens in technological disruption, and manage our way and navigate our way more effectively in a more sensible and balanced and nuanced way to actually take advantage of the opportunities as they emerge. So thinking about the technologies that I believe are probably going to present the most significant disruptive possibilities over the next medium term. And as I say, this is a personal view. You may choose other things, but I think that these are probably the four key elements that are going to have significant technological disruption for us over the medium term in the future. So AI, artificial intelligence in its many forms, AR, VR, and XR. So the different manifestations of extending our experience through augmented reality and virtual reality and extended reality. Blockchain and the distributed ledger and the possibilities that that provides us for, and in particular, one particular subset, if you will, of blockchain, NFTs. And I've stripped those out for a particular reason as being a significant subset of the crypto revolution, if you will. And we'll explore each of these in a little bit more detail about how some of this disruption is manifesting itself now, with a view to casting forward about what that might mean under each of those headings in the medium term. And then we'll talk about the approaches you can explore to actually manage your way through that new technological future. So we're going to start with artificial intelligence. Now, AI obviously manifests itself in lots of different ways. The most commonly referred to is the generative type. And if we think about it from imagery generation, there's some very, very significant steps in recent years, and the pace at which the capability of this technology and the accessibility of the man in the street to this technology is going, this is going to continue to be a very, very, very disruptive area. Now, these are three examples here that I have chosen just to illustrate the point. Many of you will probably already be familiar with them. On the extreme left there, we have Boris Eldgen's The Electrician, which won a photography competition and was presented and submitted to the competition as just an ordinary, if you will, traditionally generated photograph. But it was actually an AI manipulated photograph. And the fact that it won the competition and was disclosed at that point as being an AI generated or AI manipulated image caused a considerable amount of controversy and debate and concern within the creative sector, particularly in the image creative sector, about how people were readily taken in by the image, but also the significant qualities that it brought to bear in image creation. In the middle, it's an interesting example. It's the cyberpunk Peach John manga magazine. What I think is particularly interesting about this is you will commonly hear that one of the challenges with AI is in imagery creation is that it has challenges around repetitive image creation. So being able to use the AI to create a particular image and then a sequential series of developments from that can be deemed quite problematic. I think the cyberpunk Peach John manga magazine was a demonstration that that is actually not the case. This was a complete manga story which had multiple pages and hundreds of illustrations, which were all AI generated and have a consistent thematic and visual tone to them that allowed them to stand the test of being a cartoon-based story. And what's significant about it is the time that it took to produce it. It was produced in a matter of days, where a typical traditional manga publication can take many, many months. So again, this caused some concern and comment in the manga production environment, because it demonstrated significant time savings and potentially significant disruption for the hand drawing and digital drawing of traditional manga artists. But it does represent, in my mind, quite a significant step forward in AI use in visual content creation. And the third one is Jason Allen's Théâtre de l'Opéra Spatiale, which again was a prize winner in an art competition, which again was revealed as an AI generated image, post it being a winner. But again, a sophisticated and striking image using AI technology, which again demonstrates the capabilities of the technologies at the time, but has now, of course, moved on significantly and is more readily available to the average artist or the average producer of content. So the possibilities accelerate significantly year on year, in fact, month to month. And if we were extending into video, moving image, then again, sure some of you will have come across this, the OpenAI, use of OpenAI Sora to create this, I think it's about a 30-second clip called the Tokyo Walk. Now, if you have not seen this, then I recommend you go and check it out. Professor Google will assist you in locating it. And it's interesting that you read the prompt. So the prompt that is written underneath it is the actual text prompt that was used to create the visual that you'll see it. And it is quite striking how the prompt is a very unsophisticated prompt in that it is not using a very, very significant amount of terminology and specific weighting algorithms within there that you would often find in more or less sophisticated AI tools. So it's taken almost a natural language prompt to produce 30 seconds of very, very compelling video. And again, it demonstrates a point at which AI, if you will, in the video world came of age and demonstrated its capability by producing a very, very consumable piece of video material from a very, very standard prompt. So you can imagine that this is creating a significant amount of concern within the creative sector about how these types of technologies might displace some of the traditional roles and traditional jobs within the sector. But we can see it across much of the creative sector. So SOBO, machine learning for more rapid and effective and more economic sewing. Again, in your top right, we've got fashion design there, AI created fashion design. And of course, we have generative creativity in the music and through things like OpenAI Jukebox, and of course, through large visual models that can produce the types of material that you see there in the bottom left. My expectation will be that an awful lot of the use of AI, certainly in the short to medium term, will definitely be in the content creation field. And this is where many of the opportunities for ordinary businesses that are perhaps not typically in the creative sector or necessarily technologically heavily oriented businesses. These are the types of activities that will be applicable and usable across almost all sectors for content creation, whether it be drafting, whether it be, and that can be drafting from very, very technical things, whether it be legal documents through to just written material for blogs or press releases, whole range of areas where this type of textual content creation will be used. But again, if you're a user of something like ChatGPT, you'll know that you can use these also for visual content as well. So my expectation is that standard visual content for mock-ups, for rapid press releasing and marketing. These are areas that will make extensive use of this and see significant wins from the point of view of efficiencies in bringing finished work to market. And that might be that the AI takes you all the way from initiating through to usable material that you can use in a commercial context, or in large part used as a prompt, as a quick mock-up, as a useful tool for bringing rapidity to get concepts to a market very, very quickly. And if you are a follower of Expo North, you will know that we've touched upon some of these things in other workshops and events that we've held, and they are all pretty much available online. So if you wanted to revisit this, then certainly you could revisit this particular event where we had Jason Lust, who Oscar-winning executive producer, contributing to one of our workshops. It's very interesting, and Jason and I have spoken at length on AI. He has a more Ruskin-esque critique of AI in that he fears for what it means for filmmaking in many respects. And as he quoted, it is something that he believes will take away from the craft of filmmaking eventually over time. But he's also, wise enough and sensible enough to understand that he can't adopt a kind of Canute-like stance to this. And he sees that it can be an effective tool, as he says, to create a pitch deck inexpensively. And he, in the particular session that he made these comments, he gave very, very specific examples of where he had actually made use of AI to create a pitch deck which was suitable for the purposes of the type of production that he was engaged with at the time, and contrasting that with where he had spent many hundreds of thousands of dollars in putting together pitch decks for a different type of pitch that he was making. So he was making the point of understanding the point at which to apply the technologies in the context of what is appropriate for the project you're engaged in. There are also lots of quite mundane and small examples of the use of AI that could potentially become really, really useful and significant resource advantages and speed advantages for businesses to speed up processes and reduce costs accordingly. So, for example, if any of you use the open sourced Audacity recording software, it's already at a point where you can integrate a whole range of significant little AI plugins that can be very, very powerful. So if you've ever created a podcast using Audacity and you'd like to have a transcription, I know that I have personally spent hours transcribing podcasts in the past. Now I wouldn't need to. I could just use the Whisper transcription AI plugin, and it produces a very, very good and acceptable first draft transcription of any kind of audio content. Also, the Refusion remixing tool, which again allows you to take a core data set and remix it in different styles to experiment with different production styles and mixing styles. And similarly, you've got some very, very sophisticated AI-based noise suppression now, that again, a plugin that you can use with Audacity. And again, you'll probably have encountered these things if you have noise reducing headphones that you use on a long flight, for example. These are using AI models to actually do the noise reduction. So we'll all encounter AI in lots and lots of different ways. My expectation is that AI in the medium term is clearly going to see some job displacement. It may raise issues around authenticity. It also means that the volume of content that we can create means that there are potential competition for attention. So getting visual or getting attention and visibility may become more challenging. And this may become a particular problem as AI becomes more common in search. So if, for example, you're a business that uses organic search engine visibility to drive traffic to your business, traditional Google searches and those types of algorithms may progressively be supplanted, and also your knowledge and language sets may also be used within AI search tools that don't necessarily credit you. So those organic listings and SEO listings that have become so much part of how we establish our online presence over the last 10 or 15 years may be adjusted through the use of AI, and we'll need to adopt new models to deal with that. But it also may well give us more accessibility, give us considerable speed and efficiency, and obviously cost savings and economies that go with that. And also allows us to do increasingly sophisticated personalization, which we can either set for ourselves or as a provider become much, much more targeted in our pinpointing of outreach through the use of AI understanding reporting metrics and such like. So AI is clearly going to have an impact, but let's think about another technology. Let's think about the AR, VR, and XR side of things. Now, already we are seeing significant moves in this space. And what I think is interesting and is, of course, relevant to what the point I was making earlier on, these technologies do not sit in isolation. They are bleeding into one another. And it's the intersection of these technologies, I think, that will cause some of the most significant change. So if we think about things like the Vader Immortal, which is an immersive game using augmented reality, these are already well established and becoming highly desirable consumables, but also the ability to create this content, but also bespoke the experience of the user through the application of AI to creating them is becoming more and more common. Similarly, augmented experiences, many of you will have come across these where you use an interface, typically a phone, to actually augment the experience of a particular event or a particular locale. So this is very, very disruptive in a whole range of areas, whether it be tourism, whether it be in the music, on the creative and performing arts, but also very, very significant in the marketing experience to be able to augment the experience of a potential client of a product or service that you're making available to them. So already organizations like IKEA make significant use of augmented reality to enhance the ability of you to appreciate how their product set might look when placed directly within your own house, your own room. And so the possibilities are really quite significant. And again, things like so we have two interesting examples of more immersive experiences. So in the top right here, this is the Sphere in Las Vegas. And if you have not experienced the Sphere in Las Vegas, it is quite an extraordinary mind-bending experience to be in it. It is extraordinary the way it actually presents content very, very rapidly in a totally immersive environment. But what's interesting about this, and also the kind of virtuality of the ABBA Voyage experience, is that they are changing the way the longevity of content, the longevity of creators. So at one point, we're seeing creators being displaced through technology, creating content, but we're also extending the ability and longevity and commercialization of content through the use of technology by creating immersive experiences. And some of these things chime significantly in behavioral changes that we're seeing. So in the case of immersive experiences, environmental concerns are changing people's perception of long-haul travel. And so more and more tourism experiences are exploring the idea of how they can embed these types of, or make available the experience of visiting the uniqueness of their locale without people necessarily having to travel to do it. And in so doing, expanding their addressable audience and obviously monetization opportunities very, very significantly. But we're also likely to see really, really important changes in the use of these technologies around training, rapidly training people, but also lowering the costs of training significantly. So there are a whole range of different impacts that we're likely to see through the growing use of these types of technologies. So what I would expect to see is new and immersive ways to experience life generally. So it can be applied into lots of different sectors, much more collaborative and participatory forms of creativity. So moving way beyond the multiplayer games to a much more open mechanism of participating in creating content. very personalized and tailored experiences, again, often drawing upon AI insight that can hone that in very quick time. In the training and testing, medical care, I mean, is going to be an area that is significantly impacted by this. A lot of work in AR, VR, and XR, particularly with elderly care and particularly with dementia care, where it is possible to create entirely more familiar environments for people with dementia by the use of augmented reality, creating, if you will, historical memories for them that are more calming and helpful in their treatment and pastoral care. And of course, the performing arts, we're likely to see a good deal of these things happening in that space. I can see things going in the chat. I'll press on it if I can. If you have a burning need to ask a question at this point, unmute yourself and ask the question, and I'll address it, or we'll just pick up them at the end if that's okay. But I can see things going into the chat, so don't worry. We will come back to it and we will address some of these things. So moving on to blockchain. So distributed technology, distributed ledger technology has many different manifestations and some really important areas that I want to deal with, and I will deal specifically with NFTs after this. But blockchain has promised much, and many people feel it has yet to deliver. But again, my point will be that there is the coming together of a whole range of different technologies that make these things really significant in terms of the step changes that we can bring about. So we see it in the creative sector, as you might expect. So Audius is a blockchain-powered streaming platform, if you've not come across it. Protocol's an interesting one. So this is a consultancy of developers who have repurposed their skills into developing in this space. So these are people who have moved, if you will, moved their careers into the blockchain development tool. And you'll, of course, I'm sure, come across Imogen Heap's work with Mycelia and these different ways of protecting the creative process. So at the same time as we have a multiplicity of creative content being generated, there are also new ways of protecting it, taking it to market, sharing it, and monetizing it. So again, the coming together of these things, I think, will be an important piece. So it will not be just the volume of content that arrives that will be the disruptive factor. It will be the other things that we can potentially do with that content, whether it be creating different experiences or monetizing it and taking it to market through the use of blockchain technology. But it's also going to be very disruptive in things like supply chain management. We'll be able to track provenance very effectively. And there are already lots of examples of this happening. There'll be much better logistics management, a whole range of specific steps within the supply chain that we can think about where tracking effectively through the use of incorruptible distributed ledger technologies will really make a difference. But if we think about NFTs, I think are really an interesting idea, because what we are able to do in the use of NFTs, which rely upon the blockchain, is we can create new tradable commodities. Okay, so there are lots and lots of examples of that. But one of the interesting ones is people effectively selling virtual blocks of land. And these are tradable commodities that, interestingly enough, I had a discussion with somebody that was thinking about the idea of selling elements of an area of land that they were responsible for curating. And I suggested to them that they could potentially do this through a blockchain enabled tool. And they said, oh, we better have a word with the National Trust, because it's actually the National Trust that owns that land. And they're, I think, a little surprised when I told them that there were 3 websites already selling that land with or without the knowledge of the National Trust. So the possibilities in here are really very interesting. And similarly with cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin obviously is just one example of a cryptocurrency, but with the use of the smart contracts that you can build into cryptocurrencies and other NFT exchanges. You have lots and lots of additional functionality that you can build in, so building different commercial models, but also the option of fractional ownership, which is a very, very interesting and compelling model, which has led to explorations, for example, around civic bond issues using cryptocurrency, so that small investors in a kind of crowdfunding and crowd economy model can take ownership of civic assets through fractional ownership, which is managed and controlled through crypto tokens and the smart contracts that exist within them. And this is again playing into things like the circular economy, so the ownership of an asset through its circular journey can be exchanged and monetized at different stages. And from that, of course, we're going to expect to see things like new exchanges for these types of products as they emerge. So, and these are sometimes very significant. So Beeple's every day's first 5,000 days sold for $69.3 million. I was not the purchaser of it, but these are considerably valuable assets. So the sort of things that we're likely to see are, I think, direct creator consumer sales, very significant smart contracts that give us different commercial models, much deeper insight because we can track things better, collaborative ownership, new forms of assets. It's likely to play into very important parts of ID management and verification processes, whether that be for voting. And you can see how this would influence supply chain, along with technologies like the Internet of Things, which will really, really link in very, very closely to blockchain and crypto. So what? Well, I'm not suggesting that we can necessarily just see into the future. And without wanting to fall into a Donald Rumsfeldian, he did receive an awful lot of criticism for this, but there's actually a tremendous insight in here, it seems to me. I can't criticize anything he said there. There are known knowns, there are known unknowns, there are also unknown unknowns. Those we don't know, we don't know. So I'm not suggesting that we are going to be able to do this crystal ball gazing, but there are elements that we can think about. We're never likely to be able to identify the black swans, because the black swans are, by their very definition, things that we couldn't predict. But let's have a think about another more recent example. So we looked at the printing press. Think about something a little bit more recent that's been very disruptive, particularly in the creative sector. So this, if you're not familiar with it, is the very first MP3 player that was ever created, MP Man F10 out of South Korea. It had a significant effect, enormous effect, the arrival of MP3 technology and the algorithm that allowed us to make the musical files much more readily shareable by shrinking their size. And of course, piggybacking on another technology stack that arrived at the time, which was the internet. So you had a distribution method. Now you can actually run these kind of these types of exercises, these brainstorming exercises, where you can review the negative and positive impacts for a whole range of technologies, because I think it's quite insightful. And you can also look at what happened in terms of the incumbents within the market at the time, the vested interest that tried to stop these changes. But there are a whole range of impacts. So it crushed vinyl and cassette manufacture and really disrupted the retail model. It removed certain roles from the value chain effectively, because it made them redundant and unnecessary. There was a significant decrease in demand of certain types of product, but an increase in demand in others, and the redundancy of certain platforms that were depended upon those traditional physical distribution methods. But on the positive side, it brought in a whole range of new players into the space that were able to support these new distribution methods and skills and expertise that could be parlayed into these new models. removed gatekeepers, so it liberated a whole range of bands. So as a former performing musician, this was a real game changer in that you didn't need to be signed in order to get your material to your fans, and it significantly reduced the cost base for a lot of different activities and increased discoverability because it was digitally distributed. So there are a whole range of things that came out of this that we can have a look at and think about as being positives as well as negatives. And it's exploring the positives as to how these are significant to you and your organization that are worthwhile. Now, again, we ran a series of digital audit workshops, and again, they'll be available to you if you missed them for catch up. But if we were thinking about digital audit, typically we are looking at how you can use technologies within your organization to essentially make things faster, cheaper, easier, or better. And all of the technologies I've talked about today can potentially offer you those benefits at different points within your value chain. And I would suggest that segmenting your organization into its component parts, either through the use of something like Porter's value chain, is a good way of exploring what the opportunities are in terms of taking your existing model and finding the threats and opportunities that digital technologies can offer to you. And I'd also suggest that because we're thinking about this in the view of uncertainties, so we're thinking about this Rumsfeldian aspect, okay? So we think about this. So this comes from Hugh Courtney's terrific work, 2020 Foresight, looking at working through areas of uncertainty. I would suggest most of the disruptions here are in either two or three here. And these are, they give you, if you will, residual levels of uncertainty. And so you would be looking to use approaches around like decision trees, scenario planning, game theory, decision analysis. I'm not going to go through any of these in any depth today, but these are the sort of tools that you would use where you have this typical level of uncertainty of 2 or 3. There are also other models that you can employ to help you manage your way through here. So if we were looking at this using, for example, Kneffen's complexity model, the types of steps that you're likely to take are the steps that are typified within the complex quadrant. So you take a highly iterative approach to your changes and your adjustments that turn up. Or you can even use things like 3 horizons. So if you've not come across the 3 horizons, again, a mechanism of projecting forward based on the analysis that you've done of the disruptive possibilities that these technologies present. I also think it's well worth doing things like a future backwards exercise, which allows you to completely reimagine your business, if you will, your organization, by thinking about a utopian position and then working backwards progressively to liberate yourselves from the kind of linearity that comes from working from where you are now to working towards the future. It's a very, very useful tool, and it really helps bypass one of the real bugbears of exploring the application of technology in an existing organization, because there is always a tendency to take analog and non-digital process and simply digitize it, or to use technology to accelerate that particular process. Whereas sometimes the real opportunity, the real pivot point, is to actually completely reimagine the organization, delivering in a totally different way. The product or service may be the same at the end of the day, but the way that it's delivered and consumed may be completely different, enabled through technologies. And sometimes these future backward exercises are really, really useful for that. So in conclusion, then I'm going to say that, disruption, not new. It's happened before. It's both good and bad. I think the main disruptors for the medium are going to be AI, the AR, VR, XR, blockchain and NFTs, again, as I say, my opinion. But I do think that we can learn from historical experience of disruption that these things are seldom in isolation, They don't always persist. Not every new technology that's come forward has necessarily turned out as quite as disruptive as perhaps originally imagined. And there are a range of tools that you can help you analyze and plan. And if you do that, you'll navigate your path through. So I have think got a few minutes left. So that's all I was planning to say to you. So I'm going to stop my share there and say that's what I wanted to share with you. I can see some things have gone in the chat, so I'm going to have a quick look at those if there are any questions. But if you have questions, feel free to ask them now, and I will do my level best to answer them if there are any that are burning to be asked. Ooh. Don't be afraid. Did any of those things look familiar to you in terms of the way that you would interpret the impact of technology in the past? Did the account that I give you seem to reflect the way that you would interpret it? And consequently, do you think my premise of how one can navigate these things holds water? Ah. I understand, Naomi. That's perfectly fine. Can I talk more about AI generated content and IP? What particular aspect would you like me to talk about, Naomi?
I suppose maybe from a writing point of view. Um,
From a writing point of view?
yeah.
Yeah.
So, if, for example, if you've got something like a chat GPT and you've typed something in and it comes out with a brilliant script or a great essay, and you maybe modify it a bit to just because it's not, but it's obviously grabbing things from
Yes.
the work, from it's plagiarizing to a certain degree
Yes, absolutely.
and repurposing it. So
Yep.
yes, that's a bit. So that's sort of curious there.
Yeah, well, I suppose there's a number of aspects to it that I would say. I mean, I think AI is really useful in terms of if you have a bit of writer's block, it can be helpful to actually bring forward some concepts. If you are taking it to the stage where you're asking AI to create an entire piece of written content, shall we say, you're right that there is a threat of plagiarism, and different AI tools will give you source. Some of them will give you source references as to where some of that content comes from. Some of them won't. But we all, to a certain extent, stand on giant shoulders in as much as, we all imbibe of different writers in the past. And so our creativity is built on that. What is interesting is that platforms like Amazon KDP, which I'm sure you've come across,
Not yet.
is yeah, it permits people to put AI generated content on there, and they are, if you actually try and put content on there at the moment, that it will actually ask whether it's AI generated. It won't insist that you tell them, but it will actually ask because they are currently trying to explore the extent to which AI content is coming forward on these uh, marketplaces that allow for digital content to be created and distributed very readily. Imagery is an interesting area as well. So I was speaking to an author just a couple of weeks ago who has created a book that it's for a young adult market, and he wants it illustrated, and he's finding it difficult to explain to potential illustrators what he wants in terms of illustrations. And I was suggesting to him, well, try and mock something up with AI so that you've got something to take to them that will give them an indication. So I think there's a range of different ways of thinking about AI as a tool and supporting the process of writing. I think it's going to be interesting from the point of view of provenance. And again, I think this is where the blockchain side of things may have a role to play. Now, I touched upon the idea of the difficulty of original thinkers. Okay, so if you produce papers and thought pieces that are indexable via a search engine, so if you did it through Google, for example, and somebody was looking for content on the basis of that topic, typically there's a reference back to you. So if Google does not actually produce any particular précis of the content, it really refers you back. So as the originator of those thoughts, if you will, that search engine will reference back to you. AI-powered search engines, which are increasingly emerging now, oftentimes don't do that. So it presents us with a real problem in terms of gaining recognition, if you will, for our own intellectual property that we created. So I think there's a range of different IP issues that come from this. And I don't think anybody has particularly got the answer to it yet. But I think
I've heard that legally, because it's computer generated, you can't, it's funny, it's a gray area because you can't sue a computer, but I suppose the person releasing it is taking credit for something that, so that it's just interesting. It's a really interesting area.
It is, and I think there are interesting things that we can look at in terms of what happened with open source software, for example, where there's a completely different commercialization model. So I think with things like content that's being, if you will, drawing on other sources which are not necessarily readily referenced, there may be an opportunity to not, or it may be that it becomes that you cannot commercialize that product in and of itself. But there are other ways of commercializing it, as in open source software, where you do a service wrap and that type of thing. And I think, again, this is where the whole blockchain technology might become interesting, because smart contracts may be able to manage resale values and terms of resale and terms of handing on of content in a digital environment. So I think it's the coming together of these technologies, I think, that will be the really disruptive aspect. I don't think it will just be the one technology in itself. It will be, as they come together. And that's not a particular, I can't give you a particular answer, Naomi, because I think it is emerging, but those are the things that I would be thinking about.
Yeah. It was interesting though, because if you look at younger audiences who are consuming things on YouTube, and they don't particularly necessarily, they care about authenticity, but they don't care on necessarily it's the provenance.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing, isn't it? That there have been conversations around trying to ban smartphones going into gigs. I think that fox has been shot a long time ago. It's not going to happen. And it presents a problem because people just publish all of this stuff on platforms like YouTube and Rumble and all of the others. I think it always amazes me is, as an old person, younger people's appetite for consuming what I see as third-rate content. So much of the material that's on YouTube that is of a performance is dreadful sound, shaky hand, but people not only are happy to consume it and give it millions of views, they'll consume it through a phone which has got a tiny screen.
I work in film and television, and a lot of it's high end, and it's the same thing. And when I sit in a color grade session and I say, well, they're going, well, can we just play with this? And you're spending thousands of pounds a day or weeks. And you're going, you do know that someone's going to watch it on this.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't matter.
And I think that was kind of what Jason Lust was talking about in his piece. There is a time and a place where you will spend millions, but there is also a time and a place where, good enough is good enough, if that makes sense. And how does that play into the wider, marketing of the more sophisticated product? How does that, You know, is it a shareable content that leads people back to the premium based content, which may have additional aspects to it delivered through augmented reality that is not available through your phone? I mean, there are lots of ways of exploring it. And I suppose we don't, as I say, I'm not suggesting that I'm looking into a crystal ball and can tell you exactly what's happening, but there are threats and there are opportunities, and I think people will explore. I think if you explore this from the point of view of possibilities rather than threats, then I think you're likely to get more from it. Are there any more questions? Something in the chat? Was there a question? I don't understand blockchain. Well, you're not alone.
Sorry, it's all me asking questions. Well, I mean, like, if you want to just go and learn some more about everything that you've given such an amazing, talk on, where would you go besides YouTube?
Oh, there are so many resources now. It depends on how formal that you want to be. You know, I mean, there are actually courses that you can do. You know, be it, and these don't necessarily have to be through an institution. There are Udemy courses and a whole range of things. But you can consume content in a whole range of different ways on these topics. And in all honesty, Professor Google is a decent starting place. And interestingly, with Google these days, you now actually have an AI assistant, which will give you. So if you ask the question, how can I learn more about blockchain? Google will give you a series of links, but also a little bit of a bit of advice. You know, the doctor is in these days from Google. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. I hope my answers were fab as well, Jenny, but they probably weren't. So I would say absolutely they are fantastic questions, Naomi. So thank you for that. So any further questions before? Because I'm conscious that we've gone a little bit over time. I don't mind. I've got time. But if there are any further questions, speak now, forever hold thy peace. Colin, this was your first experience here. Will you come back, or have I ruined it for you?
You've completely ruined it for me, Tim. I may well come back. No, it's been really interesting. Thank you.
Not at all, mate. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Well, if there are no more questions, then I will call this to a close. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your time, for your attention. I hope this has been useful. This is me signing off from Expo North. I have really very much enjoyed my time with Expo. And it has been quite a change, because this would have been, when I first started, me standing on a stage talking directly to you with a screen behind me. So it's been quite a change, a hell of a journey. So thanks very much. And this has been recorded for posterity. So if you ever want to watch it again, if you're some kind of masochist, you can. So.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please do visit our website. I put a link in the chat box, www.exponorth.co.uk, and that is where you'll find our events section. So although our project, as we said at the beginning of this, is wrapping up on the 31st of January 2025, we do have a couple more workshops coming up. 2 in November and one that I think will be in December. So if you check them out, and even if you think, oh, I don't know if this is relevant for me, please feel free to share it to anybody who you think might be interested in those particular workshops that we've got coming up. We also have our archive section on the website, which is where you'll find all our previous videos from previous workshops. It's all there, and this is where you'll find today's recording in a few weeks' time. Also on that website is where you'll find our inquiry form for specialist sector support if you would like to have a one-to-one chat with one of our specialists if you are based in the Highland Council area. So I'm just going to pop a link here now for that form. If you would like to talk to somebody, you need to get in touch with us ASAP so we can have a chat with you and see what we can do before our project wraps up. Social media, you'll find us on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. thank you once again for joining us. Thank you so much to Tim. And be safe, everybody. Hopefully see you at the next couple of workshops we've got coming up. Thank you now. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.